Hey there, Mark here from the YouTube channel Car Audio Fabrication, and I'm here today on behalf of CT Sounds to show you how I built a custom subwoofer enclosure for two CT Sound Strato 12-inch subwoofers. This box will feature internal bracing, corner 45s, a flush mount baffle, and more, so let's get started. To start the build process, we of course need a great box design. For this project, we're going to be using a slot-ported style design with a centered port. If you would like to build this box for your Strato 12-inch subwoofers, a link to download this design is in the video description. Remember that it's important to only use this design for your CT Sound Strato 12-inch subwoofers. In order to start cutting the 3/4 inch MDF that I'll be using for this build, I start with marking out all of my cuts using a tape measure and a T-square. I have found that it's always better to measure twice and cut once. Next, it's over to the table saw to cut each of these pieces for the enclosure. For most boxes, I typically start with cutting the bottom and top of the enclosure, then the baffles, and then the back, followed by the sides. As I cut each piece, I'll check it off on the design blueprint. That way I know what's done and what I still need to cut. Now, since this particular design features corner 45s, I angle my saw blade to 45 degrees and then proceed with cutting these pieces. Between each cut, I move my saw blade fence in order to account for the width of each corner 45. Now that all the pieces of this enclosure are cut, I can move on to doing the detail work. In order to make this box very strong, it is important that the box has internal bracing. For this, I'm going to be making a window brace. I start this process with marking out all of the cuts. I now need to rough cut each of these windows, so I drill holes in the corners and then proceed to rough cut using a jigsaw. Now, I actually save a little bit of room in these windows when I'm making the cut with the jigsaw because I'm going to be making the final cut using a router. In order to cut to the final shape, I'm going to be using the Mobile Solutions Fukuda square. I size this tool to the correct window size and then secure it to the brace using double-sided template tape. Now, over at the router table, I've loaded in a flush trim bit. This particular bit has a bearing and it copies the shape of the square to the window brace. I'll repeat this 4 different times in order to complete the window brace. Now, since I will need a brace for each side of the enclosure, I copy the shape of one brace to the other using that same flush trim bit. Now it's time for me to do the detail work on the baffle. I start with marking out the center of my mounting hole circle, and then I mark out all the lines for the port cutout. All of the details for this design information is provided within the design blueprint. Next, I use a piece of cardboard and a push pin along with a pencil to sketch out my mounting hole. This allows me to know where my cut should be when I use a router to make the hole. In order to start the process of making this hole, I start with drilling a pivot hole at the center of this circle. This gives me a small hole for my Mobile Solutions Perfect Circle tool to pivot upon. I adjust the Perfect Circle tool so that it will cut using my spiral trim bit at the edge of this circle. Now I can turn on the router, I can plunge into the material, and I can make a pass, thus cutting the circle cutout. After cutting the cutout hole, it's always a great idea to check that the subwoofer fits, and in this case, we're good to go. Now next, I need to cut out the port, so I once again drill corner holes and rough cut using a jigsaw in preparation for using the router. Please keep in mind that if you don't have a router, you can always use a jigsaw to make all of these cuts. I stick straight templates to the wood using double-sided template tape, and then, once again, it's over to the router where I once again use the flush trim bit to cut everything out. Now, since this is a double baffle box, I sketched the copy of my first baffle to a second piece. For the larger flush mounting holes, I'm using a Mobile Solutions Smart template to make the hole. But you could also use the Perfect Circle or a jigsaw. I rough cut both the port and flush mount holes using a jigsaw. I then stick the Smart templates to the wood with template tape and copy them. And then I use my previously made baffle board to copy the port shape. Now, it's time to move on to applying edge profiling. Edge profiling is adding a rounded or chamfered edge to various pieces of the enclosure. In this case, I start with adding it to the port entrance of the box. Note that I went extra deep with the router bit in order to leave a hard edge to aid in carpet trimming later. After lowering the bit back down, I also use the roundover around the flush trim holes. I also do this on the port end pieces so that air flows more smoothly over the corner of the port inside the box. The same is true for the brace. I round over all internal edges of all of the windows. Next, I load in a small rabbiting bit. This allows me to cut a small corner notch into the side pieces of the enclosure, and this will once again come in handy when it comes time to wrap the box with carpet. Now that we have all of the router work complete, it's time to move on to assembly. I always start the assembly process with assembling the back, bottom, and one side of the box. A couple important things I want to point out here is you always want to fully cover each mating surface with wood glue. Also, with 3 sides assembled, this is a great time to check and make sure that the box fits within the vehicle. Hopefully you've already checked this before you even started building the box, but you can never be too sure. After these steps, I move on to adding the other side of the assembly. Next, I apply the front baffle board. From here, I have to move on to making the port assembly. I start this process with connecting the 2 port walls. Next, I attach a corner 45 that adds strength to this connection. I then measure the location for my window brace. With the window brace nailed into position, the port assembly is now complete, and since I have 2 sides of the box, I repeat this process off camera for the opposite side. Now I can add each of the port assemblies into the box and nail them into position. Next, we add the second baffle to the outside of the enclosure. The box is really starting to take shape. Now is a great time to seal the corners with wood glue or fix any uneven cuts with caulk. This is also a great time to add the remainder of the corner 45s into the enclosure. With these steps complete, assembly is nearly done. I just need to add the lid of the box. To do this, I apply glue to all of the surfaces, add the lid, and nail everything into position. The enclosure is now completely assembled. Let's move on to painting and carpeting the enclosure. Here I'm applying black primer paint on the port and on the mounting surfaces for the subwoofer box. After allowing ample time for this paint to dry, I mask off all the surfaces that I don't want upholstery glue to stick to. Now it's time to start applying the upholstery glue. I apply this one surface at a time to both the box and the carpet. After allowing 5 to 10 minutes for this glue to become tacky, I can then carpet that surface. When I do the front baffle, I carefully push the carpet into a groove that I had cut earlier on the back side of the second baffle piece using a rabbiting bit. This groove gives me a really nice spot to hide the carpet seam, and it also gives me a spot to easily run my razor blade to make a clean, precise cut. This will provide a very clean looking front baffle. At the port location, I use that hard edge that I talked about earlier in order to make precise cuts around the outside of the port. I repeat this carpeting procedure to cover all of the sides of the box. Now I move on to the sides of the box. I start with applying adhesive. After it dries, I cut all of the corners so that I'll have flaps. I then fold each of these flaps onto the box and work the carpet into the wooden groove that we created earlier using the rabbiting bit on the side piece. I repeat this process working each flap into a groove and then cutting it. Once complete, the side of the box is completely carpeted. I repeat this procedure on the other side of the box as well. Now all I need to do is of course apply wiring and install the subwoofer and secure it in position using mounting hardware. And there we have it, a completed custom subwoofer enclosure for 2 CT Sound Strato 12-inch subwoofers. If you would like to see more videos like this on the CT Sounds channel, be sure to drop a comment down below and subscribe. And if you would like to see more custom fabrication videos, please visit my channel at youtube.com/caraudiofabrication. Thank you for watching this video.